record. So if you're tuned into the live streaming, you should be seeing it soon. You're all set, Mr. Mayor.
We good?
Yes, if you want to gavel in.
Okay. Good evening, Council, senior leadership team, and the viewing residents. I see we have quorum. I now call this meeting, regular meeting of Monday, June 1st to session. And is there approval of the agenda, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. On a motion by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Stewart, be it resolved that the agenda for the June 1st, 2020 regular meeting of Council be adopted. If you wish to call for changes to the agenda? Yep.
And any discussion? Not seeing any. All in favor of the agenda?
I can call for the vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. Oh, it's recorded vote. Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion is carried. The agenda is adopted as circulated.
Okay. Next is the disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. After viewing the agenda, is there any councillor who has a pecuniary interest or general nature thereof to declare? Not seeing any. I ask the clerk to please note that. Next is the hearing of presentations, delegations, regional report. First is presentations, CR COVID-19 municipal update, and Chief Limburner will lead off with this. Chief, you're on.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, councillors, senior staff, and all members of the residents that are listening. Just a brief update on what's currently going on in our pandemic situation. So Pelham, as a whole, we've had 31 cases in town. We currently have one active case. The rest are resolved. In the region, we're up to 666 cases. 558 are resolved, which is over 80%. There's been a slight spike in the last couple of days due to a incident in migrant worker residents, one of the farms in the region, and they have something relatively similar, but on a larger scale out in Simcoe, where the migrant workers have infected themselves. The good side of this is that they're contained within the farming community. They're not in the general public, and they've isolated it, and the public health is, they feel they have a good grasp on it. But when these things happen, they spike the numbers. And for instance, we had our case doubling time was at 258 days this morning, but with the spike in the migrant incident in the region, it knocked that number back down to 98 days. So I would anticipate as they get things back in order that number will continue to rise back up to into the hundreds. So it's unfortunate, but it's happened. So 84%, like I said, of all the region's cases are resolved. In Ontario, we're at 27,859. About 78% of the cases have been resolved. 2,266 deaths. Canada-wide, we're at 90,947 with about 54% resolved. That number is relatively low comparison to Ontario and Niagara, mainly because of Quebec. Quebec is very, very low in resolved cases. Case doubling time, like I said, has gone down because of the migrant incident. The infection in the area, in the region, is 60% females and 40% males. That's pretty consistent. Infection spread, 61% is close contact, 26% is community spread, and about 12% is travel. On institutional outbreaks, that number is getting better by the day. We're down to 5 of our institutions that have outbreaks, which is a far better number than a week ago. The province is testing about 18 to 20,000 people a daily now. They've really stepped it up, and at this point, they've tested about 720,000 people. So it's getting very aggressive, and they're trying to pinpoint where things are spreading. Most cases are in Toronto, as the news is reported, and the province has been discussing about regional opening rather than a province-wide opening. Certain things, I would anticipate this will be largely in the northern communities where there's very little population, very little travel. The danger of opening up the Niagara Peninsula and keeping Toronto closed is, if we do that, everybody from Toronto will come to Niagara, and then we'll have a massive outbreak and a second wave here. So I wouldn't anticipate Niagara opening anytime soon until they get the large centers under control. The province announced a few more activities which are allowed this weekend and tomorrow. Parks for backwoods camping is opened up, batting cages, and drive-in theaters. And these all, as I said before, with them, the province puts restrictions on all these activities. So they have to meet the public health guidelines in order to operate. Next week, what are we doing? And as far as Pelham, next week, our Bylaws student is starting, and we will be stepping up patrols in our parks. Our parks will remain open until 9 p.m. each evening, and at that time, we'll lock them down. And we'll try to reduce the amount of people congregating and also vandalism to reduce that. The region announced today that June 12th, they're going to resume water testing at all the beach areas. They've announced that the local municipalities will be allowed to start opening up their beaches, but with restrictions and with the help of public health, because the water has to be tested on a regular basis. The province is voting tomorrow. They would anticipate that they're extending the state of emergency in the province till the end of June 30th. So our EOC committee group, control group, is still meeting Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and our emergency control committee meets every Thursday. We have 6 working groups that are working on developing procedures to open up our facilities. I would anticipate maybe that will happen early July. One of the things we've done is in our fleet, we have 8 trucks that have barriers installed, so it allows us to have more than one person operate in a vehicle at one time. Our cleaning of facilities is still at a heightened increase. We're going through the facilities multiple times in a day to make sure that the risk of infection or spread is reduced. We have 2 public bathrooms opened at parks. Marlene Street, Stewart Park, and Centennial Park have their public washrooms, and as per public health guidelines, these washrooms are cleaned twice a day. We're working on entry into facilities. We will be incorporating a screening process, which will include 11 questions and a temperature reading, and you'll be vetted. So when we do open up our facilities, all employees coming to work every day, residents coming into the buildings for whatever reason, and contractors coming in to do work in our buildings, they'll have to go through a screening procedure, and it'll all be documented to control access. Our mass training continues. We've completed almost all employees. There's still a few stragglers out there, and as I extended it out to council, anybody that wished to have some mask training, just give me contact me and give me a yell, and I'll gladly set that up. We still continue to supply lots of PPE, hand wipes, hand sanitizers in all vehicles. We've ordered more PPE, which is in pretty good shape. We've installed barriers at Town Hall and NMC at the fire halls, and we've ordered spit guards to help our employees separate themselves from other people when they're dealing with whether it's meetings or dealing with the public at the counters. We've been talking about the cooling centers. It's a region-wide discussion. The MCC is being considered as being opened up as a cooling center. We're working on safety procedures and risk assessment to see if that's possible. There's a few other municipalities that have already announced that they are opening, and there's a few working on it, and there's a couple that said no. So at this point, we haven't committed to opening it up, but it is a consideration. And overall, I think that Niagara is doing very well. With the exception of the migrant announcement today, we're well ahead of the province and the country. We have really good numbers. 4 out of the 12 municipalities have no cases right now. Like I said, Pelham has 1, and we're moving in the right direction. So all these efforts, although they're very difficult at times, they're working. So I'd like to thank everybody for their cooperation. If any questions, go ahead.
Thank you for that, Chief. Is there any councillor that has a question for his report? Not seeing none.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have a motion presented by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that Council receive the COVID-19 update presentation from B. Limburner Fire Chief and Community Emergency Management Coordinator for information.
Any further discussion? Then we'll call the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion is adopted as presented.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda, summer aquatic update by the Director of Recreation, Culture and Wellness, Ms. Van Ravensway.
Through you, Mayor Junkin, I'd like to update Council on the aquatics facility and possibly approval of preparing the pool and getting it ready for the pending provincial restrictions to be lifted. As the report notes, it takes approximately 2 to 3 weeks to prepare the pool and the facility for opening. Staff have been working with the Ontario Recreation Facilities Association along with the Life Saving Society in preparation. The Life Saving Society actually produced a guide for reopening the pools and waterfronts. With that, we actually received the guide from our local public health department today, again, so showing their support. Basically, what we would be doing is preparing the pool. If we do get the provincial restrictions lifted, we would gradually phase in opening and being open for the public, starting with public swims and eventually swim lessons under the guidance of the Life Saving Society. And I can open it for any questions.
Thank you for that report, Ms. Van Ravensway. Any questions from councillors? Not seeing any? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. I was slow putting up my hand. Through you, Mr. Mayor. If the pool does reopen, will there be access to the change rooms, or will it just be show up and use the pool and go?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. According to the guidelines, we would be encouraging any participants to come already dressed. We are actually fortunate with our upgrade to our pool building. All of our showers are outside, which is a bonus compared to other municipalities where everything is in the change rooms. So our change rooms could be closed off, and the shower use prior to entering the pool could be well used in our case. So the change rooms would be closed, the washrooms would be open, the showers would be, everyone would need to shower prior to entering the pool as usual.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Stewart?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions? Seeing none, ask the clerk.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. On a motion by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Stewart, be it resolved that Council receive Report 2020-0079 and that Council approve, pending provincial and regional public health permission and/or guidelines, the reopening of the Pelham Pool for public swim and possibly swim lessons during the summer of 2020. If you'd like to call for any discussion on the motion?
Any discussion on the report? Not seeing any?
So I'll call the vote. Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion is adopted as presented.
And next on the agenda is the report from the CAO, David Cribbs, Chief Administration Officer.
Good evening, Council. Just a couple of items. I'm happy to report we held our second all-staff meeting by Zoom last week to discuss various managerial and administrative issues. I can tell you that it would be fair to summarize the thoughts of the town's administration as being preoccupied with the issue of layoffs, with timelines for reopening, and with safety guidelines on how to reopen appropriately. It was about a 90-minute call, and that's where all the questions were focused. So that's what town staff at least are thinking about. The item I wanted to broach with you this evening, if I may, is to suggest to you, and I'd like to propose a date of October 26th. It's a Monday, where we have no scheduled meeting of council or committee or similar. For a special meeting, if it meets with your approval, to yet again engage in a strategic planning exercise. So my thought process is as follows. Council, after the last election, you quite appropriately took the time to come up with a strategic plan. 13 months after you created your strategic plan, and after being in office for 13 months, back in January, we held a strategic prioritization exercise, which sort of updated and because you accomplished a number of the things you wanted to. And moreover, had some experience at governance. And of course, we also had a new administrative team. And so we worked through that evening, adding some new items in and then prioritizing and coming up with a list of 30 or just over 30 things to do. And I thought that was a really good exercise. Of course, none of us foresaw the pandemic coming our way, and now here we are. So it's my submission to you that by October, you are going to have a new colleague. Whomever that is, will be back up to 7. And he or she ought to have some opportunity for some input on the direction going forward for the, at that point, roughly 2 years left in the term. Also, this pandemic is fundamentally changing the natures of this town's finances. and present some new and unique problems, which really no one's managed through before. So I think it would be an appropriate juncture to look at our list of 30. We've accomplished a number of things since we sat down and did that exercise. So happily we'll be able to take some off the board. Add in some new if that's the will of council, if you think there's some new things we need to focus on. And then beyond that, possibly say keep the list the same and the ranking priority the same, not for staff to dictate that to you, of course. But it may well be that you want to reprioritize any number of items in light of the pandemic and where we find ourselves in October. Because by October, I would submit we'll probably have a good idea whether, to what extent the feds and the provincial government are coming to offer financial support or are not doing so. There was a significant announcement from the federal government sometime today about new funding opportunities for municipalities. So obviously we'll be looking at those. But I think I submit to you that it would be a very good use of our time to spend an evening looking at our strategic priorities in light of the pandemic and seeing whether you want to rebalance them or reprioritize issues. And at that point, you'll have a new colleague. So October 26th is the suggestion. It's late enough that we can plan quite easily. And if that meets with your approval, a motion to that effect would be gratefully received. Thank you.
Councillor Wink.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CAO, is that date before or after the operating budget gets approved? Because the reason why I say that is this year we did the priorities in January. The budget was already approved. One of our priorities, and we're going to be talking about that later on tonight, one of the priorities was would require money that we did not set aside in our operating budget. So, you know, it's kind of counterintuitive having the priorities done after the budget is completed.
So there are very, very fair question, sir, and there's sort of two answers. Firstly, as things currently stand, you would probably have approved the capital budget at that point and not the operating. We likely will have presented the operating to you. We'll be within about a week of presenting a proposed budget to you, but you certainly won't have passed one. I also put a caveat there. The treasurer, the deputy treasurer, and I are going to have a conversation the next week or so about whether we think it's wise or desirable to try to maintain the default schedule, and i.e. the schedule we used last year, which broadly speaking, I really like and I think is excellent. We were the first municipality in Niagara to pass its budget last year, or for this calendar year. So broadly speaking, I like how Pelham approaches this. That being said, we're in a very different world right now, and there are some arguments to slightly delaying the usual course. So will you have passed the operating? No. If we keep the current schedule, absolutely not. You will have passed the capital if we keep the current schedule. You may want to slightly defer that so that the new person can have some greater level of participation. I don't know the answers to those. I feel like I had a second point, but that's probably good enough an answer for now.
Yeah, so I would suggest that if we're going to stick to the same schedule, that the date that you're proposing gets moved forward a little bit. I'd rather see the priorities prior to us even considering the operating budget.
Well, if it so pleased council, if I'm I mean, I certainly hope some of you will, beyond Councillor Wink, will throw out some thoughts here. We could, if it was your will that you thought generally this was a good idea, we could come back to you with some alternative dates on 2 weeks from tonight on the 15th. And then you could pick amongst those, looking at the election date, start dates, and by then the treasurer, the deputy treasurer, and I will have had some time to put our heads together and have some suggestions to you around timing of the budgets.
Councillor Wink, is that?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor
Excellent.
Hildebrand.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Hildebrand.
Oh, Councillor Hildebrand. You're muted.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, one of the things I'd like to discuss as well is the approval of the capital budget and the operating budget schedule. Because I personally like approving both of those together rather than doing one and then the next. Because I think they're conjunctive in my mind. And that's the way my preference is for approving budgets. So that factors in. But I agree with Councillor Wink's comment with regards to having the priorities done before you approve the budgets.
Councillor, Mr. CAO?
This is exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping to elicit to get some guidance, frankly. I'm not hearing any, well, at least thus far, I'm not hearing any objection to the idea of another strategic planning night. And then really it's about getting our ducks in order for it relative to election, by election, and also relative to budgetary process.
Yes, like your suggestion was to come back June 15th with the a little bit better idea of the schedule of the budget, and then council could decide at that time the timing of the meeting. I think that was a great suggestion. Any other comments? Okay, not seeing any.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have a motion by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Hahn. Be it resolved, the council received the COVID-19 update presentation from D. Cribbs, Chief Administrative Officer, for information.
Any further discussion? Not seeing any. I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you for the vote. Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion carries as presented.
Thank you. Move on to delegations, and we have a delegation from the Cannabis Control Committee. Presenting tonight is the chairman, Tim Nohara. Tim, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council. Is it possible to bring up the schedule that's in the agenda package?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, everyone did receive it on their agenda. I don't have that capability from my workstation here.
If you have it in front of you, that's fine. That's what I'm going to
Members of council did receive it, Mr. Nohara. Thank you.
Yeah, we should have it, Tim.
Thank you. So thanks for welcoming me back, and thanks the last meeting for providing for this meeting and 3 more after it in order to attempt to complete the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, as well as focusing on other maybe less urgent components of our regulatory framework. So what I wanted to do today, if you have the schedule in front of you, council meetings are highlighted in, I don't know what color that is, I'll call it beige, but they're highlighted. So we're at the June 1st council meeting. And what I'll do is I'll update you on what's happened since I briefed you at the beginning of May, about a month ago. And then I'll take you forward from here, from June the 1st to the next council meeting on June the 15th and the next council meeting on July the 13th, where we hope to put council in a position to approve the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments if they so wish. So looking backwards, on May the 5th, we started a consultation process in the town, and we circulated, thanks to the assistance of staff, we circulated draft official plan and zoning bylaw amendments at that time. We reached out to, I just saw an email actually a few moments ago from staff that indicated they sent out about 170 requests for comment. We did receive 42 comments, at least the way I counted them, from the public, 42 from the general public. Back in September the 10th, where we had a physical public meeting, we garnished 36 comments from the public. So we feel pretty good about the reach of this process. This was an electronic process, a website process, advertising in the Voice, and direct mail outs from staff to those who had commented previously. So we got a very good draw on public comments. We also received agency comments. We received comments from all of the cannabis industry, regional comments. So we're very, very happy with that transparency, the consultation process that is underway. As of the 27th of May, so last week, all those comments have been reviewed, and there are amendments that have been made and proposed and approved in principle by the CCC. So as of last week, we have a new set, a revised set of official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. And we're just in the process of arranging to meet with the region on those. Some of the changes addressed some region concerns, and our objective, and we believe we have a set of amendments that will achieve that objective. Our objective is that the region will approve this version so that final approval of the official plan amendment is solely within council's capability. In other words, the region will not the region is the approval authority for official plan amendments, and there are exemptions that the region can exempt themselves from that authority and leave it in council's hands, and we're hopeful we'll receive that exemption. So we've got dates scheduled to meet with the region shortly, and we'll update you once we have. So moving from today and moving forward, we will be working on a few minor amendments. You've seen one bringing amps into the odorous industries nuisance bylaw. You saw a couple weeks ago, there's a minor revision we believe we need in the site plan control bylaw. So we're moving these smaller ones along in parallel. We hope to get the region exemption on the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, make any final changes sometime in the next 2 weeks, and then we'll have a pre-final set, if you will, where we'll start to bring in final legal reviews. So the idea is in sort of mid-June-ish to begin that legal review process. We've had a legal review previously, update that review, and by the next council meeting, we hope to bring you revised official plan and zoning bylaw amendments that are basically in the town's court. So that's June the 15th. We'll have Nick McDonald with us from Meridian Planning Consultants, and one ask I have of council is if you can afford more than 10 minutes for his presentation, that'll be, it'll give you an overview of the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments at that time. That will put these documents in your hands for almost a month. So July the 13th is when we hope you'll be in a position to approve those documents. So you'll have a, hopefully very close to final draft on June the 15th. And you'll have time to review those and maybe ask questions of the committee if you wish in that interim period while we're shoring up our legal reviews of those documents. On July the 13th, I'll be back before you with Nick McDonald for that final presentation for an analysis of what has changed, given all the comments that we received, and an ultimate recommendation for approval. And then in the remainder of July, we have a few other items that are on our agenda to take us through, including assisting where we can with staff on the dark skies bylaw. So today's meeting was to give you that update, to speak to the consultation process, that we've completed the review and made revisions, that we're waiting on final regional approval so that we can move forward with our legal review, and by mid-month bring you a draft that you'll have plenty of time to review and consider.
Thank you for that report, Tim. Any questions from councillors? Comments? Councillor Wink?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Nohara. Are you going to be making those public comments and the agency and industry comments available to council?
Yes, Councillor Wink. And so right now, there has been an analysis by Meridian Planning Consultants of all the comments. So all the comments will be available in raw form. And then there's been an analysis of those comments where they've organized them into themes, if you will. And that draft report is available. It's not final yet. And that'll be combined by Meridian into a recommendation report that, if you will, explains the changes that they have made given those comments. So the raw materials, the analysis of the raw materials, as well as the recommendations will all be made available to council. Be happy to provide the raw materials sooner if you wish. They're available now, and even very soon you'll have available the analysis of those raw materials. So if council gives us some direction on, I mean, I can certainly send them to you in small groups so that you have them as they're timely available. Be happy to do that.
Yeah, I would personally prefer to see the raw comments sooner than later, please.
Can I ask a question of the CAO?
Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you.
David, are you there?
I am indeed.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yep, go ahead, Tim.
CAO Cribbs, I have communicated previously in discussion with you with a couple of councillors at a time. Is that one way we could continue to do this, or would you, if we sent you something, would you prefer to send it to all the councillors on behalf of the committee? Is there a way, maybe it's the clerk we need the assistance from, is there a way where the committee can communicate with all the councillors just by saying, here's information, where we're not requesting anything? Is there a process where we can do that?
We're just making documents available to elected officials who are entitled to them. So we're not materially advancing any decision-making of this body. So I really have no problem with, as we've been doing,
okay.
You just send email. I can't see what the objection would be to that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Hahn, you had a hand up. Go ahead.
Through the mayor, thanks for the update, Tim. Is there anything that you require or can we can be of assistance from council to help you stay on track with your schedule?
It's an aggressive one. Thank you. I think we're on track. I appreciate that. In fact, the ability to share basic documents with you sooner, I think could help a lot, because one of the things we've struggled with, just because of the sort of paper load of this file, is the delegation timing, which is necessary so that you can review. But often we have certain materials available well in advance. So at this point, we have our meetings. I think we're on a good track to meet these deadlines. The only thing out of our control at the moment is region, and I'm not anticipating any trouble there, and we have a bit of slack to play with there. So thank you, but I think we're good.
Okay.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to make a comment that the Director of Planning has provided us with a format for the comments and the way that the committee is going to address these. And so what you'll be seeing is typical of any file that comes from the Planning Department with their comments. So that's the process whereby the Meridian planners are providing the information to the public and to us.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions, comments? Tim, I'll just say that I know you've got a couple of greenhouse operators on your committee. I'm sure they're working double duty between the committee and their businesses. I imagine they're still giving you their input, though. I take it.
We've had great input. Thank you. And yes, we're all working. I echo CAO Cribb's comments on what's taking up all the time and interest these days, and of course that's on top of doing the normal work. So they are, and they're very active, which is terrific for the town.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, not seeing any other questions, I will ask the clerk to call the vote.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, on a motion by Councillor Wink and seconded by Councillor Stewart, be it resolved that Council receive the Chair of the Cannabis Control Committee Delegation, Tim Nohera, for information. Councillor Hahn, with no further comment or questions? Councillor Hahn?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Hildebrand?
Yes.
Councillor Kaur?
Yes.
Councillor Stewart?
Yes.
Councillor Wink?
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin?
Yes.
The motion carries as presented.
Okay, next on the agenda is the report of Regional Councillor. The clerk has informed me that we do not have a report, so we can miss that one. Adoption of minutes. So item 5.1, CO, do you want to read the motion? I'll just let the clerk read the motion.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have a motion by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the following minutes be adopted as printed, circulated, and read. C09-2020, regular council minutes of May 19th, 2020, and SC09-2020, special council minutes also of May 19th, 2020. If you wish to call for errors and omissions.
After hearing these minutes read, is there any errors or omissions that council would like to point out? Not seeing any.
So I will call the vote. Councillor Hahn?
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand?
Yes.
Councillor Kaur?
Yes.
Councillor Stewart?
Yes.
Councillor Wink?
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin?
Yes.
The motion is carried as presented. None that I'm aware of, Mr. Mayor.
Next on the agenda, business arising from council minutes. The Madam Clerk has informed me that there is none. So we move to number 7, request to lift consent agenda items for separate consideration. Does any member of council wish to lift any of the consent agenda items? Not seeing any, then we'll call the motion.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, on a motion by Councillor Kaur and seconded by Councillor Stewart, be it resolved that consent agenda items as listed on the June 1st, 2020 council agenda be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved as applicable. Are there any questions? I'm sorry.
Any questions or debate on that, on those items? Not seeing any, we'll have the clerk call the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Hahn?
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand?
Yes.
Councillor Kaur?
Yes.
Councillor Stewart?
Yes.
Councillor Wink?
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin?
Yes.
Motion is carried as presented.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have 10.2, staff reports requiring action. 10.2.1, extension of draft control plan approval, Oak Haven Estates.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the motion on the report moved by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 0063 of 2020 and approve a 2-year extension of draft plan approval for Oak Haven Estates subdivision with a lapsing date of June 28th, 2022, which includes the time required to satisfy the additional comment work requested by the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority and the administrative revisions to the conditions requested by the Niagara region. If you'd like to call for questions or comment.
Yep. Any questions or comments on this item? Councillor Hahn.
Through you, Mayor, and this question would be to, I guess, a combination of Public Works and Planning. So with regards to the pumping station that is discussed in here, who is responsible for paying for that pumping station?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I will take that question. The majority of the costs for that pumping station will be borne by the developer. The pumping station is being designed so that it can also have capacity to service some existing development that is not on sanitary sewer. Particularly, there's a piece on Maple Street and the residents on Memorial Drive. So those are in the urban area and should be on sanitary sewers. So where it services the existing community or the existing residents, the town would be responsible for that portion of the cost. And then ultimately the maintenance and operation of the pumping station would rest with the region of Niagara.
So further to that then, at what stage would the pumping station go in? So assuming that the 2-year extension, hypothetically, let's say it goes forward, then in 2 years, the subdivision gets built. At what stage in that build would the pumping station be built? In other words, I guess I'm looking at what point is there an expense?
Mr. Mayor, through you, so certainly at 2 years is the extension for draft plan approval. So prior to then, the subdivision would have to be registered and all the conditions fulfilled. After registration, construction would commence and the pumping station would have to be completed prior to any building permits being issued for any new dwellings. And so we're looking probably somewhere within a 2 to 3 year time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I guess if I could ask a question to the Director of Planning, the other fly in the ointment is the stormwater. I believe we discussed. Will this? Do you see that this development will have to also have to put in a stormwater pond somewhere, and where are they thinking of running that water to?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, there will be a stormwater management facility in this development. Unfortunately, when going back, many years when the Cherry Hill development was approved, it was not, the stormwater management facility for that site was not sized to accommodate additional land. So there has to be a stormwater management facility on these lands. There is a small unnamed creek that runs along the backside of this property. The developer has acquired an additional piece of property that would give him access to this unnamed creek, and that would be where the stormwater outlet would be for these lands. So it would go into an existing water course.
Thank you. And would that type of work have to be especially when they're dumping into whether it be unnamed or not, would that have to be okayed by the NPCA, or how does that work?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there are a number of approvals required. There's the engineering design is reviewed by the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, the region of Niagara, as well as town staff, and then also Ministry of Environment through a compliance approval through the Ministry of Environment. So there are 4 levels of approval that are required for that stormwater management facility.
Okay. Great, thank you for that. Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. This is just a general comment I have. When I look at the file that started in 2012, and I understand it probably was started before then, between Public Works and Planning, there must have been an enormous amount of time spent on these kind of files. I would hope in the future we've got some kind of mechanism to charge these developers for all the time that staff have to put in, because every time they put in an extension, I'm sure all they're doing is saying, staff, do more work. And I'm not sure, I'm not asking for anything to be done in this case, but it's one of those things that bothers me that they seem to be able to come in and get free service. And I know we're a service company, but how much is free? How much? I think there's at least 3 or 4 extensions they've already gotten and an LPAT hearing. Just a general comment.
Okay. Any comments on that, Ms. Weens, or not?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. I mean, staff have certainly been working with this developer as well as the previous owners of this property, because it has been sold more than once, in terms of trying to find engineering solutions, not only town staff, but regional staff as well. And the result is, I mean, to go back, it's as a result of when draft approval was granted in 2012 for these lands. There were not engineering solutions identified at that time, and so it's left everything to the very end, and it's causing, it's causing a lot of issues in time, and the detailed engineering design takes time. But initially, when this was draft plan approval was granted, there was no indication that a pumping station would be required to the developer. And there was no indication that there was no access or an outlet for stormwater at that time. So as a result, staff are trying to find solutions and work with the developer, and it has been taking a considerable amount of time. And we've worked with a number of engineering consulting firms that the various owners have retained, and they all have different solutions, some which are less workable than others.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Stewart.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Weens, would you be able to tell us what section of Memorial Drive this would service? Like from the corner of Maple, how far east?
Mr. Mayor, we're looking from Maple to Balfour that it would service and provide connection. That portion of Memorial Drive that is in the urban areas currently does not have sanitary sewer.
Councillor Hahn?
Through the mayor, this question would be, I guess, to Director of Planning as well. So just so I'm clear, so should we go forward with this extension? What is the actual cost to the town? Is there any reapplication fees or anything like that?
Mr. Mayor, through you, certainly there's, to require the extension of draft plan approval, there is a fee. It's not a large fee, but there is a fee when they requested draft plan extension. It covers town staff to process the extension request and really cover off report writing and review of any new conditions. So those were fees that we collected 2 or 3 months ago when they put the request in for the extension. Going forward, at the time when we have detailed engineering costs, and we will be able to know what other costs are going to be, and certainly the developer pays for all of the costs to service the subdivision that is related to their lands.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk.
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor, again on the motion by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved, the council receive the report 2020-0063 and approve a 2-year extension of draft plan approval for Oak Haven Estate subdivision and with a lapsing date of June 28th, 2022, which includes the time required to satisfy the additional comment work requested by the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority and the administrative revisions to the conditions requested by the Niagara region. Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion is carried as presented.
Okay. Thank you. Next is 10.2.2, part lot control exemption.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, the recommendation report on a motion by Councillor Stewart and seconded by Councillor Kaur. Be it resolved, the council receive report 2020-0077 planning as it pertains to a request to lift part lot control on 121 to 129 and 136 to 142 Acacia Road, described legally as blocks 44 and 47 on Plan 59M 456. And parts 1 to 5 on Registered Plan 59R 16684 and parts 1 to 4 on Registered Plan 59R 16685 respectively, and that council approve the part lot control exemption bylaw for same.
Yeah. Any questions or comments on this report? Not seeing any, then I will call the vote.
So for the vote, Councillor Hahn,
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand,
Yes.
Councillor Kaur,
Yes.
Councillor Stewart,
Yes.
Councillor Wink,
Yes.
and Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion carries as presented.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. On to unfinished business. 11.1, short-term accommodations.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have a motion by Councillor Kaur and seconded by Councillor Wink. The council received report 2020-0049 as it pertains to short-term accommodations, policies, and regulations, file AM 1218, and that revisions made to the official plan and zoning bylaw since the public meeting was held are minor in nature and no further public meeting is required. That council approve the amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw as well as the licensing bylaw for bed and breakfast establishments and short-term accommodations. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, and before I open it up to council, we will let staff comment on this. Ms. Weens?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, I would like to introduce to you Ms. Tara O'Toole. Ms. O'Toole is the policy planner that has been with the town since February, and she's responsible for preparing this report and the draft official plan and zoning bylaw amendments and licensing bylaw. So I'm going to ask her to give you a brief overview of what these documents do, and then we can open it up for questions. Ms. O'Toole.
Thanks, Barb. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Tonight, I'm going to be speaking about the policies and regulations for short-term accommodations within the town of Pelham. In September of 2018, council had directed staff to undertake a consultation process to help inform policy and regulatory changes for the town. In November 2018 and April 2019, one-on-one meetings were held with stakeholders, and in October of 2019, a stakeholder roundtable was held to outline the proposed changes and received additional feedback in advance of the public meeting on October 22nd, 2019. Following the public meeting, revisions were made to the draft policies and regulations to address the concerns and questions raised by council and members of the public. And since that time, further research has been conducted and zoning and licensing requirements from other municipalities were reviewed for the best practices to understand how other jurisdictions have addressed short-term accommodations. Our recommended approach builds on the experiences of other municipalities while still addressing the needs that we have right here in the town of Pelham. We're here tonight to complete this process as the recommendation report that was presented on April 27th, 2020 was deferred. At the present time, the official plan includes some policies and permissions that relate to the bed and breakfast establishments, but it's silent with respect to a dwelling being rented for the short-term accommodation. Currently, the zoning bylaw does not contain regulations for a bed and breakfast or a short-term accommodation. So the draft zoning changes that we propose will allow bed and breakfasts that are defined as a principal residence where the owner and operator live and provide guest rooms for temporary accommodation of guests for no more than 28 consecutive days or less. And they may offer meals, which is permitted in zones, but not the residential zones, which is subject to provisions. Furthermore, draft zoning changes proposed to permit the short-term accommodation rentals of an entire dwelling or a dwelling unit that in whole or part is rented or available for rent for no more than the 28 days. And these are permitted in agricultural, special rural, neighborhood commercial, general commercial, and commercial rural zones, but are subject to meeting licensing requirements. The mechanism that we've prepared for consideration and approval is this licensing bylaw. That will require a license be obtained prior to the operation of a short-term accommodation or a bed and breakfast. This will allow the town to regulate and govern the operation of these establishments within the town. And as a requirement of the licensing bylaw, we've prepared what we like to call the Renter Code of Conduct. It was developed to establish acceptable standards of behavior for renters and their guests, and to minimize any adverse social or environmental impacts on their neighbors or the neighborhood. The licensee is required to keep the confirmation of receipt of the Renters Code, and have it readily available for inspection at all time by a municipal law enforcement officer for a period of 1 year. Additionally, a responsible person consent form is required to ensure that there is a responsible person that will be available to attend the short-term accommodation at all times within a period of no greater than 1 hour from the time of contact via a phone call or an email. The proposed official plan and zoning bylaw have been revised to address the comments received at the public meeting and council's direction. In its staff recommendation that the amendments are considered minor in nature and that no further public meetings required. The proposed licensing bylaw was reviewed with bylaw enforcement staff and the town clerk to ensure that staff have an understanding of the process to be undertaken for the license to be issued and have the tools needed to implement this new licensing regime. Together, the proposed official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and licensing bylaw will provide the appropriate tools required for the town of Pelham to manage the short-term accommodations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that report. Thank you very much for that report. Questions and comments from anyone on council? Councillor Corr.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the director. Could you speak to section 15, sub 2 and sub 3 of the report?
Just let me get to that, sorry.
And it's dealing with grandfathering in short terms.
So what I can advise is that the grandfathering provision is there for what we refer to as bed and breakfast establishments, where you are an owner occupied and you're offering rooms for rent within your home and you live there. So those units will be grandfathered. and will be allowed to obtain a license without zoning bylaw amendment, any existing ones. We have about 5 or 6 of those in town. We've never had a complaint associated with them. And so on balance, we felt it was appropriate to provide grandfathering on those situations. With respect to a dwelling that is rented out in its entirety and is not occupied by anyone, they are required to meet the licensing, and there is no grandfathering allowance provided for those. So they, in order to obtain a license, would also need to obtain zoning approval from council in order to operate. I'm sorry, Councillor Corr, you're muted.
Councillor Corr,
you're muted.
Sorry about that. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the director. So you're saying that we're only going to grandfather 5 establishments and their bed and breakfasts, and all Airbnbs will have to reapply?
So, Mr. Mayor, anything that is owner occupied, yes. So there are those 5 or 6 that exist in the town. Anybody else would have to seek and obtain zoning approval first from council before they can get a license to operate.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, why don't we just name those 5 things and we can put it in the bylaw? The 5 residents.
Mr. Mayor, that certainly is one approach that we can do. Licensing bylaws typically get amended, from time to time, and so you run the risk of losing those when you do make amendments. But that certainly is an approach council could consider if it wishes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I know at the beginning of this process, we talked about 20. You mentioned 20. I think that's underestimated. I think there's a lot more than 20 Airbnbs or bed and breakfasts. It just scares me that these, with that provision in section 15 sub 2 and 3, that these people will have the ability to continue business as usual.
So, Mr. Mayor, to be clear, when we had indicated that there was 20 or thereabouts, that's based on our review of websites that these operators list on. Airbnb is the largest website, but there are a number of other ones that we've certainly looked at listings in Pelham. Those that are the traditional bed and breakfasts that are owner occupied, there's only about 5 or 6 of those.
Councillor Corr, are you done or not?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Any Councillor Hildebrand?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. One of the questions I have is, can you explain to the Director of Planning why we've gone from approving these for the single detached dwellings to having these in all types of dwellings? That to me seems like we're opening it up to these people who buy condos or any of the newer houses, and they can use them for bed and breakfasts or Airbnbs. All they have to do is get a license.
Mr. Mayor, through you, so in order to get a license, you have to have your zoning approval. And so you just can't buy a house and get a license. And the reason we've clarified it from a dwelling is because in the commercial area, there are apartments, and council was directed us to allow them in the commercial area. So in the commercial area, we have apartments. So we wanted to capture those circumstances where it's a dwelling above a storefront and so forth. And so there we modified the definition to be broad enough or general enough to include those. But whether you're in a single detached dwelling, an apartment, or a condominium, you cannot operate one of these legally unless you have zoning approval in the residential area.
Thank you. Councillor Wink.
So through you, Mr. Mayor. So currently the urban living area allows for B&Bs and single family residential dwellings. We're looking at expanding that to townhouses, semis, and whatever. I don't see why we're in the urban living areas, why we're trying to expand that, because quite frankly, parking is going to be again an issue with respect to a townhouse. There wouldn't be sufficient additional parking available to the customer. I can see expanding that to the downtown areas, the transitional areas. Fine, not a problem, but to the entire urban living area, I can't see that expansion.
I see that Mr. CAO has his hand. Wish to make a comment?
On the face of it, I understand why council would be hesitant, because it sounds like you're expanding the potential possibility for short-term rentals everywhere. Mm-hmm. But if council recalls, the zoning amendment requires an interested party to come through council. And so I would submit to you that as far as basic defensibility, the staff aren't suggesting we make something theoretically impossible to start with. But in this case, people would come to you and essentially have to make a business case. I'm doing some damage to planning language, but each individual application is always decided on its merits. So maybe there is a townhouse end unit somewhere, or a future townhouse that hasn't been built yet, where it would be appropriate. Maybe there is a 3-story walk-up where, there's 6 units or something, and all 6 could be. I don't know what that is, but this doesn't. On the face of it, doesn't outright prohibit. The mechanism, the appropriate mechanism, is the community has some input. Council has input at that application time, so that in unusual circumstances, someone, if it's appropriate, council of the day can determine that. So it's sort of trying to take a different approach, but maintain the fundamental control with the elected council.
Councillor Wink.
So I understand what you're saying. However, we're adding further potential rights to property owners to make an application for a zoning change where someone is going to be able to put in a B&B in a townhouse in the urban living area. And the neighbors around there are not going to be happy. And in all honesty, I was shocked to see that my next door neighbor can open up a B&B. Like, I wasn't aware of that. Obviously, I must have missed that when reviewing the original plans or the official plan. But to expand it further, I don't see it. I look at in the official plan what we're proposing for Northwest Fonthill and East Fonthill. There was nothing stated in the official plan for that area that bed and breakfasts are not allowed. And now we're coming in and saying, oh, that was an oversight when we did the secondary plan. Let's add it and make it the same as all the rest of the town. And oh, by the way, let's add it to townhouses and different densities. So I don't see. I'm not in favor of adding townhouses to the urban living area, and I'm not in favor of adding bed and breakfast to areas that there was an oversight, and I don't want to see it in North West Font Hill or East Font Hill.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Councillor Hildebrand.
Yeah, basically, I agree with my fellow councillor, Councillor Wink. I'm in agreement with his comments. I've got the same concern.
Thank you. Wait, I see the Director of Planning has her hand up. Go ahead, Director.
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, just to maybe alleviate some of the concern about that, even in a townhouse, they have to provide for the appropriate parking for that. So unless you can, if you can't get the parking on site, then you wouldn't be allowed to have a bed and breakfast. That's one of the zoning provisions. So, you know, the chances of it happening are not very high, but is there one or two cases where it could be accommodated in a townhouse? And again, a bed and breakfast is owner occupied. So you as the owner are managing those guests, you're living there with them. It's not the bed and breakfast, it's not the short-term vacation where you rent the entire house and the owner is not there. That's not what we're talking about, just to be clear. I'm not sure if that alleviates the councillor's concerns or not, but those are the provisions that are in the bylaw to ensure that there can still be adequate parking and that the townhouse is large enough to accommodate.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, along with what Director of Planning has said, I understand to have a B&B in your home, there are fire code things that need to be met and public health as well. It's not as simple as you think. So it's not easy to put one in. But other than that, my concern with this whole bylaw is about the short-term rentals where the owner is non-occupied. And so we're not allowing any of those in residential areas.
That's correct.
Okay, so how will we manage the ones that are currently, well, I'm sure nobody's using them right now, but the ones that have been been a problem in our community? How do we stop that?
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, if they are operating illegally, then they would get notice that they need to come into operation legally. They would need to get a license, and in order to get a license, they need zoning approval from council first. And so bylaw enforcement staff would be responsible for enforcing the licensing bylaw and ensuring that everyone has a license. And if they don't have a license, then they can't operate and they would get fined.
Councillor Stewart, does that answer your questions?
For the most part, for the fines for that type of behavior where they're operating outside the law, I'd like to see a sliding scale. So, you know, first offense is so much, second offense is so much. And then, you know, set the boundary, you know, where if there's so many, then you get police action or you take them to court. It needs to be very strongly worded and enforced because it's too easy for people to make money that way.
Do you have any idea what the fines are, right? Have you labeled the fines now, Director, or is that something you do in the future? Well, I see the CAO has his hand up. Perhaps he wants to answer this.
Right now, we're looking for thoughts, feedback, and either approval or direction to redraft some parts of the work already done. With respect to penalty for potential future violations, this is one we're highly likely to put a component into the town's expanded AMP system, the monetary penalty system, for relatively minor infractions. and for first infractions. And we will maintain the capacity to go by way of Part 3, which is to say swearing out long form informations and using the court process run by the region. At the end of the day, it's the justice hearing the matter that determines the penalty, not the municipality. So they can do anything that the Provincial Offences Act allows them to do, which is used to be up to 100,000. I think is now at $250,000, if I'm not mistaken. At any rate, they have more significant powers than the municipality does as far as penalties, and they can also issue orders to comply. So to that part of Councillor Stewart's point, we would make sure that the serious violations found there, assuming there wasn't compliance, found their way to the court system, and relatively innocuous things, first offense and some degree of triviality, would be appropriate for the monetary penalty system the town is running. So a combination of the two, not dissimilar to how we're proposing to treat cannabis.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, the licensing bylaw provides for $250 a day through the administrative municipal penalty system.
No. Thank you. Councillor Hahn.
Through the mayor, and this is to the director of planning. So in the background, you talked about the dates. You started with the stakeholder meetings, November 2018, then there was April 2019, October 2019, and then of course our planning, or our public meeting, I should say, in October of 2019. Have those stakeholders then received a copy of what we're looking at now? Have they all been issued a copy of this so that they can have further comment and an opportunity to review?
Mr. Mayor, at this point in time, no, they haven't. Anybody that attended the public meeting in accordance with the town's procedures and the requirements under the Planning Act, they do get notice when council makes a decision. But we've had this recommendation report is here for council to consider and for council to make a decision on. We've had the public feedback and the public consultation. And we certainly heard very clearly that the public was not desirous of having what we refer to as the short-term accommodation in the residential areas. They had significantly less issues with the traditional bed and breakfast, which are the one that is owner-occupied.
Thank you. Any other question? Councillor Corr?
Yes, through you, Mayor, to the director. So existing Airbnbs, how would that look under Section 15? So I'm running Airbnb today. Am I grandfathered, or I have to go through the same system? And am I guaranteed to have that Airbnb under this new bylaw?
Councillor Corr, when you're saying Airbnb, what do you mean?
Well, short-term rentals. I apologize.
So a short-term rental is not allowed in the residential area. If you exist in the agricultural area or within the commercial area, you would be allowed to get a license. But if you are in a residential area, you cannot get a license, and therefore you cannot legally operate in Pelham.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the director. Could someone just provide breakfast every morning and call it a bed and breakfast and not live at the location?
You have to live there, and so you're only renting out a bedroom. You're not renting out the entire house. You actually have to live there and provide the service.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Hildebrand, Councillor Hildebrand.
I still have two concerns. One of the things is the stakeholders being updated, and I did check on the stakeholder in my area, and they certainly don't feel that they've been updated. And the other issue is the expanded from single attached dwellings. Both of those issues are a serious concern, and I will not be voting to approve it based on those two issues.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Wink.
So just a question to the Director of Planning. why wasn't bed and breakfast included in originally in the Northwest Fonthill and the secondary plan?
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, the urban living area includes those areas. So I think there might be, I don't know if it's a misunderstanding or not, but the urban living area includes all of the residential areas that are in the urban area of the town.
But if you look at our official plan, there's separate requirements for each of those two areas that are different than the rest of the urban living areas. So it's specified in the official plan.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it is specified in the official plan, and the Northwest is a secondary plan. And so they have those additional policies, including or in addition to the urban living policies. And same with East Fonthill, there's the urban living policies and then the additional policies associated with the secondary plan requirements. So because there is secondary plans for Northwest, those are additional planning policies over and above what was in the official plan.
Okay.
Okay, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, so the overriding urban living area does include both those areas still.
Yes.
So really, a bed and breakfast, someone can apply for a license in those areas right now, provided it's a single family dwelling, and we're trying to add or townhouses and other density to that, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And again, those have to be owner occupied.
No, I understand what a B&B is, although I've stayed in a B&B that wasn't even owner occupied but provided breakfast. I still have a bit of a hang up on expanding it to anything other than a single family dwelling.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
Okay, any other comments? I guess reiterating what the director said, if we were going to allow this in the commercial area, then we have to expand it from the single dwelling so that we can take in the apartments that are located above the downtown stores. So, Councillor Wink.
Yes, so if you look at what's being proposed, the amendments, Part B, number 1 refers to the downtown area. So we're changing it to all dwellings in the downtown area. 3, 4, 5 are all downtown Fenwick and transitional areas. 6 is general agricultural. So I have no problem with those. I have no problem in saying, okay, someone who wants to do a B&B in one of the units above a commercial space downtown, fine, go ahead. You know, we want these types of units in the downtown or the transitional area. We don't really care for them too much in the residential areas.
Okay, yep, thank you. Well, any other questions or comments? We'll call the vote.
So I'm not sure, like there's certain things in here, like the licensing and the there's a lot of stuff that I agree to. I just don't agree to adding. So if you look at the official plan amendments, number 2, and 7 through 12, where it's high density and townhouses and whatever, I have issue with that. other than that, the rest of the official plan, I'm fine with.
Okay, thank you. So some guidance perhaps. Can we, is it appropriate for council to discuss deletions in order to pass this, or should we be doing the vote first?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if a member of council wishes to propose an amendment to save and accept certain sections, then that amendment could be considered, debated, amended, and voted.
Okay, thank you. Mr. CEO.
So if I may, it is often, but not tonight, the preference of your staff when we present major reports of this size and magnitude that took months and months and months of labor to hopefully get them passed through and carry on to the next file. We are, however, in a world where people aren't staying in hotels or short-term rentals or B&Bs. That's not happening right now. Hence, there was no problem deferring this from April to tonight, and from tonight for us to bring you back additional work. The thing is, there's a lot of thought that goes into how the different sections work together, and changes or deletions could have absolute unintended consequences. So I would like to submit to you that a much better course of action is to highlight those items with which a majority of council has concerns, and to send it back to staff, and we'll bring you back something that reads harmoniously but reflects our updated understanding of your preferences and your will. So please don't do deletions, because it's significantly possible that Ms. O'Toole, Ms. Weens, and or myself would want some time to think about how those play through. So I would submit to council that your best way forward, rather than attempting to pass something, is to highlight the challenges or where you feel there to be shortcomings, and we will bring a modified product back to you in relative short order.
Thank you. All of council in agreement with that approach? We'll just highlight what the majority of members find changes should be made to, and then the planning staff will take that into consideration. And then they'll bring it back. Councillor Stewart?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Before we get to that point, there's a couple of things I'd like to mention. We did have a public meeting, and I want to be sure that the people that attended the meeting and were, very concerned about all of this, do get a chance to review this as well. And I have two other quick things. One of them is if we could get some sort of report from Chief Limburner about the requirements for a bed and breakfast, what kind of fire code standards they have to meet, and possibly something through public health, because these are also monitored through public health. If we can get some information on those added into it, not necessarily added in, but presented so that we can all see what's involved in running a bed and breakfast in your home. Thank you.
Mr. CAO, do you think that information could be forthcoming?
So there are two pieces there. One, I have good news, and the other I don't. We can absolutely, in a follow-up report, include sections on the fire code and its basic generalities on its requirements, and basic generalities and public health requirements for educational purposes. I'm happy to do that. The other piece, both Councillor Stewart and Councillor Hildebrand this evening have mentioned, well, how has the public been shown this? That is not the process here, and that's not the process for the town of Pelham or the city of St. Catharines or the city of Sarnia or the city of Toronto. That's not what we're doing. We did a very deep public consultation process. We really listened to a lot of people. There was a lot of opportunity for input. We've taken that. It's reflected throughout the work product, but it's your decision, and we're now here back to you. The key part, there was a key part earlier on where you read out where we don't think the changes are material enough to require another public meeting. That's a big deal. That's saying this is sort of in line with what we've heard. So here we are. This item was on the agenda in late April. Opportunity for the public to see it, interact with you. At this point, the decision's in your hands, not anyone else's. And we don't keep going back to the well on that with the public. It's for the public to interact with yourselves or for you to interact with the public. And now here it is again in June. So they've had April 25th and June 1st. It's been a public document. I just want to be abundantly clear. After we do that public consultation, we take that goes into the work. It's very clearly in the work in this file. In fact, those public comments guided where we got here. And there were public comments in favor of bed and breakfasts and making sure that legitimate economic and social purpose sort of survived this, and also legitimate complaints about party houses and not wanting vacant homes in residential areas. So we feel, at least in that part, we've sort of hit the want and needs. But if council wants a fundamentally different process where on any important issue, after we do all our work, we go back to the public again, we need to have a separate conversation about that, because we are following our process quite appropriately in the default municipal process. So we all, from the staff position, we think we've done this appropriately. And I can tell you, based on our official process we have, but I've heard at least 2 out of 6 indicate some displeasure with that. And there is, whether this was short-term rental or something else, we wouldn't be going directly back to the public for commentary on this. We've taken the work, taken their input, and created something, and the ball is now in your court. And so I just say that for clarity of how this works through. Now, if council is unhappy with that, we can have a conversation off and then look to change our process or our policy. But we are comporting with ours, and it's not, it's a hard thing to criticize us for following the manner in which municipalities do this work. Just leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CEO, for the clarification. Any other questions or comments? Perhaps Mr. Councillor Wink, you can reiterate the sections that you would like changed.
Yes. So section 2, we're part of the amendment of the official plan number 2, where we're asking permitted in all dwellings. I want to keep that as single detached. And then in section, I don't understand why we are having now to go into the secondary plan and add bed and breakfast in the secondary plan at this point in time. Why are we centering out those 2 subdivisions?
Ms. Weens, would any care to comment, or just taking notes?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I was taking notes there. So yes, I think, again, it was just to, out of an abundance of caution and make it very clear that it was, because as you indicated, you thought they weren't allowed in these Northwest and East Fonthill secondary plan areas. So we were trying to provide clarification there, and that's why it was included in those, just to be clear.
Okay, so number 7 then refers to townhouses. I would like that deleted. So help me understand low density residential and low density residential special policies, please.
Any comments from the director?
Just trying to get there, catching up here. Sorry.
Okay. Yep, no problem.
Got to move back and forth with my screen. So you're in.
So I'm looking at It's titled Amendment to the Official Plan
Yeah.
for the Corporation of the Town of Pelham.
So it's number 9.
So number 7 refers to townhouses. Number 8 refers to low density residential. So is that same as single family dwelling?
You know, in the official plan, low density residential also includes semi-detached. So we're going to have to go back, and from my understanding, I understand that you only want to allow these in single detached dwellings.
Yeah.
And so we are going to have to go back and rework those sections in their entirety to be specific about the type of dwelling versus the type of density. Because the low density also includes semi-detached.
Yeah, so really it's 7 through 12.
Right.
And elimination of number 2.
2, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any comment from councillors on the numbers just mentioned by Councillor Wink? Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councillor Wink's comments, and Councillor Wink and I are basically on the same page.
Okay, thank you. I guess the question is, does anyone on council have any objections if we move ahead with Councillor Wink's suggestions?
So through you, Mr. Mayor.
I'll get input from the clerk.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we'd be looking for a motion to refer back to staff, and staff will then bring these this information forward.
Okay, do we have a motion to Councillor Wink?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Okay, and is there a seconder? Councillor Hildebrand, thank you.
And do you have a date of expectation as to when to bring this report back?
So question to staff is, how much time are we looking at to get it back? What's reasonable, Barb?
Mr. Mayor, through you, we could get it back to you probably, we'll try for the first meeting in July.
Okay. Okay, that's fair.
Councillor Hildebrand?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We're in a time during the pandemic, and I don't think anyone is rushing us to come out with this policy at this time. So pressing the date for July the 1st, I don't think it's necessary. So I would sooner err on the side of caution and give the planning department lots of time, because holidays are coming as well.
Yeah.
And
so someone made a comment to say that Airbnbs are not being used during the pandemic. Yes, they are. They are being used. So people, here's an example. If I'm a worker in the area, I'm being sent from Toronto to work in Niagara Falls. I rent an Airbnb for a couple of weeks, do my work, and then go back home. So there are still some Airbnbs being used at this point in time.
Okay.
So if staff say that the first meeting in July is doable, we're not asking for a lot of changes here. But if they're saying that it's doable, then let's do it.
Okay. So, Director, I guess we'll aim for that, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and along with the official plan amendment, there will be some corresponding changes to the zoning bylaw amendment and the licensing to make them all align.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussion on the motion? Then we'll have the clerk call the motion.
So members of council, just for clarity, this is on the motion to refer the report back to staff and that staff return with their report in the first meeting in July of 2020. Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion to refer back to staff is approved.
Thank you. No, where are we? Wait. No new business. Update on the Gypsy Moth. Update from Public Works on the Gypsy Moth spray program.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So I just wanted to give you a brief update on where we stand with our 2020 Gypsy Moth spray program. The first spray was conducted on May 27th. It started at 5:30 a.m. and they finished somewhere in around 7:30 a.m. So it took them a couple hours to get the first spray done. It was excellent weather. Our consultant, Bioforest, came down after. Well, they were here during the spray, but they came down after as well. Do a depository check on the leaves, and by all indications, the spray was very effective in coating the leaves of the trees. So as it stands now, our second spray is scheduled for this Thursday morning, June 4th. Again, it will commence at the same time at 5:30 a.m. and we should be all wrapped up within 2 to 3 hours. And then following that spray, we'll be reporting back to council with the effectiveness of the spray program as well. We'll be undertaking some defoliation surveys in late August, middle to late August, once the feeding has stopped, and try to get some kind of idea of what the defoliation was within the town of Pelham in those spray areas. There was helicopters flying this morning. That is not part of the town spray program. That's a private spray program that has been undertaken. And they correspond with us as well, so we know what's happening, so that when we do get calls from the public, we can let them know that, you know, that's not the town's program, that's a private spray program that's being undertaken. So first spray was a success, and second one right now, and looks like the weather's going to be cooperating, would be Thursday morning at 5:30 a.m. If there's any questions.
Any questions for the director, Councillor Hahn?
Through the mayor, it's just really a request for the director, and that is, I don't live in the spray area, but I have gypsy moth in the front and the back of my yard in the trees, and they're very small caterpillars at this point. So this seems a very critical time for folks that aren't in the spray area to learn what they can do. And I know there's been some communication in the paper periodically. There's a piece, I know that, but I don't know that it's specific enough. I'm just wondering if we can add some detail as to local places that people can get the tape, or that they can get their own the BTK spray, and about maybe the approximate cost, things such as that. Talking with some of my neighbors, you know, some of them have the tape, some of them don't know where to get it, or how it applies, or how much it costs. Same with the spray, if they want to get it, where do they get it? How much does it cost? What do you do with it? You know, the amount of time perhaps that they have to invest into taking some of these initiatives on their own. I think that might be some of the communication we can add to, whether it's in the paper or wherever on the website, wherever we're putting it, just to mix it up a little bit, because I think right now is a critical time, because they're crawling up the tree like crazy. So if people can take some initiative on their own right now, I think that would be very, very wise.
Comments on that, Director?
No, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Very good points. We do have a website that's dedicated to the gypsy moth, and if you go to the town's website and follow the links, you can find it. On that website, there is a link to resources and companies that do private spraying from the ground. There's also some resources with respect to FAQs and how to manage gypsy moth on your own. But definitely, it's a good point, and I'll be speaking with Mark to make sure that we get that information out to the public via our website, as well as possibly an ad in the Voice.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Just because sometimes, in my case, you know, I've got a couple trees, so I'm not going to hire someone to come and spray them. I'm going to take some initiative myself. But you know, where do I go? How much does it cost? That kind of thing. Some local stores, you know, that might have it. That kind of thing. Greenhouses sell some of these materials, so it would just, I mean, it promotes business in local business as well, so it's kind of a win-win.
Okay, any other comments? If not, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have a motion by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Hahn. Be it resolved that Council receive the verbal update on the Gypsy Moth Spray program from Jason Marr, Director of Public Works, for information. Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion carries as presented.
Okay. Next is presentation and consideration of bylaws. I'll let the clerk read the motion.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, on a motion by Councillor Stewart and seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that Council for the Town of Pelham, having given due consideration to the following bylaws, do now read a first, second, and third time and do pass same, and that the Mayor and Clerk be and are hereby authorized to sign and seal the bylaws. Bylaw 4241 of 2020, being a bylaw to exempt blocks 44 and 47 on Plan 59M 456, municipally known as 121 to 129 and 136 to 142 Acacia Road, from part law control. Bylaw 4242 of 2020, being a bylaw to appoint Andrew McMurtry as acting Chief Building Official for the Corporation of the Town of Pelham. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Any questions or comments on these bylaws? Okay, seeing none, I will have the clerk call the vote.
Thank you. And Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion carries as presented.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Move to 14, motions and notices of motion. Motion moved by Councillor, or notice of motion moved by Councillor Hahn and seconded by Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll present the motion as it was published on the agenda. This is pursuant to the notice of motion from the last meeting, May 19th. Be it resolved, the Council hereby rescinds the Committee of the Whole recommendation of March 23rd, 2020, approving inclusion of a parking strategy for the town to be included in the 2021 budget considerations, which was subsequently ratified by Council on April 6, 2020, and that the Town of Pelham should approve the hiring of independent planning, engineering, or parking consultants to provide a master parking study to Town Council in 2020. Staff have written multiple reports on the issue, and Town Council has now assessed multiple potential land sales and potential development applications where the adequacy of parking has been a flashpoint issue. The cost of such study is estimated at between $45,000 to $60,000, as this item was originally deferred to 2021. It is an unbudgeted expenditure for 2020, so I would ask that staff advise as to the funding available for this initiative, and that Section 4.3A1 of the Reserves and Reserve Funds Policy be and is hereby suspended, and that the $50,000 unfunded expenditure will be added to the 2021 budget. Open for discussion to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I thought this was a notice of motion. This is
no, it was a notice of motion last week. This week it's the motion.
Okay. First, we will go to the movers. Councillor Hahn or Councillor Hildebrand, would you, either one of you, like to speak to this motion? Not okay. Councillor Hahn.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, this is in essence we've noticed an increase of issues with regards to parking and lack thereof, in particular in the area of East Fond Hill. This has really been a bone of contention, I guess you could say. So this needs to be addressed sooner than later. I recognize there's some funding and it will have to be split between the 2 years. But I think this is something that we really need to address because this isn't going away. This is only an issue that's going to continuously get worse as we continue to develop. So tackling this sooner than later is very, very key.
Thank you. Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think the requirement for this parking study was highlighted when we had the last meeting with regards to a land sale in East Fond Hill, and how developers are pushing ahead, and we need to have in place parking regulations to reflect what our community requires.
Okay. Any other discussions, questions? Councillor Wink?
So this was identified as a priority back in January, and I think it was in the 6 to 10 that we've got to wrestle this down. This money wasn't put in the budget for 2020. We're facing a budget deficit anywhere from $400,000 to $800,000 this year. Over and above that, we have $200,000 of unbudgeted expenses this year, which a lot of that went to the Cannabis Control Committee. To put us further in the hole, another $50,000, $60,000 at this point in time. Yes, it's needed, but I can't see authorizing this in 2020. It should be going into the budget for 2021.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hahn?
Through you, Mayor. So some of this will be doing exactly that, Councillor Wink. And I believe the CAO is going to want an opportunity to speak to this as well. David, are you there?
I am.
Perhaps you can allude to the funding, because we did run through this, and I do know that there was some savings with regards to the flower bed competition, and there's some other savings as well. So what we're looking for is a small amount into this year and then the rest into 2021. Can you speak to that, David?
Wait, Councillor. Yeah, go ahead, CEO.
Well, I'm happy to speak and answer, but Councillor Wink clearly has something he wishes to say.
Yeah.
Councillor Wink.
So regardless of what savings, we saved a little bit of money on the beautification, which is great that we're doing that. But we're losing over $400,000 like deficit for this year, $400,000 to $800,000. So that's got to be paid back next year through taxes. And for us to add on to that, I'm not for it.
So I'll speak to that. So the alternative is we let this go. We let it go into the fall, perhaps even into next year. And by doing so, perhaps potential developments, hypothetically, could then, continue on with their developments that would be short on parking. And I believe we're working on early 1990s or late 1987 or something like that, a policy where it's 1.2 vehicles per dwelling, which is completely inadequate. In the meantime, we can move forward with developments with that in mind. So yes, it's kind of between a rock and a hard place right now. I fully agree with you on this. So the decisions we make now or don't will shape our community and our further parking situation in the future. So we can absolutely hold off, but by doing so, it's not necessarily an opportunity that we will be able to get back once developments are built with that very minimal parking guideline that they now have.
So before I'd like to speak on this also, if I may. And I'm totally with Councillor Wink. The last 2 years, we have had budgets come in at 7%. And we cannot bring another budget to this town 3 in a row at 7%. They can't afford it. We can't afford it as a town. We are right now, the estimate for the C19 is anywhere between 400 to 800,000. We've got 200,000 unfunded to the Cannabis Control Committee. Right off the bat, without doing anything else, if we take the worst case scenario at 800,000 and we add the 200,000 to the CC, we're at 8%. If that's the worst case scenario, without doing anything else, that's an 8% increase without any other expenditures. I totally agree with Councillor Wink that later, that I can't see any reason why we can't put this off until the fall when we see exactly where we're going to be with the C-19 expenditures, how much it has cut into the revenues. I definitely will not be voting for this motion for those reasons. I believe, Councillor Stewart, you had your hand up?
Yes, I did. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly understand that we're under the gun financially, but unless we act on this, it's going to make things, further development, very difficult. And at this point, we don't yet know what kind of financial help we're going to be getting, possibly from the region, from the provincial government, and the federal government. There may be help coming to the municipalities yet. So, you know, there's a lot of unknowns at this time.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, and then, but not seeing any, we will call the vote.
Well, actually, I had asked the CAO to speak to the funding.
Mr. CAO?
Yes, thank you. So we did take a look at how we might, if required to, pay for some or all of this study this year. I can report partial success. Staff are not able to identify enough savings opportunities to fund what we believe will be the cost of the study in its entirety. However, there are $16,000 from the beautification, the bedding. It was roughly $21,000 in cost. We set aside $5,000 for the competition and having the public take the reins with some beautification. So that there's 16 there. We were able to identify $3,000 in planning pertaining to conference attendance and the like that can't happen now, that can be offered up. And then there's a $15,000 item. Now, council needs to appreciate that this is not a savings. We have $15,000 set aside for the satellite imaging and mapping that's required to go into the new zoning bylaw that we all understand and you have identified as a strategic priority. Like we're aiming for well into next year. So that's a precursor piece, but we could repurpose that money into this parking strategy study that is also a precursor or part of that master zoning bylaw. So there's 15 there that can be repurposed, although what that means is we're going to refer that item to next year's budget, and that's sort of one of those hills we have to die on if we're going to get the zoning bylaw done. So that's 18,000 out of the planning area, 16,000 from Public Works to take you to 34. There's an argument, and sorry, we were working to a tight deadline. Excuse me here, I have to read off on another screen. But development charges can be used to pay, growth's supposed to pay for growth, right? Basic principle. Development charges are charged to help finance that growth, and you're allowed to use a portion of development charges for studies that deal with growth. I'm sort of slightly simplifying here. So for instance, the town has its official plan review, downtown master plan policy, environmental impact studies, transportation master plan. Those are items that are already in our development charges. It's silent when it comes to parking, and it's silent when it comes to parking because Pelham's never done one before. So arguably we can find there's probably somewhere 18 to 20% of the cost could probably be assessed to development charges. Now that account right now is $73,000 in the red, but part of the reason it's $73,000 in the red is we haven't been able to issue building permits for more than 2 months, and now we can again. And in fact, I understand that business is brisk, so hopefully that will help come back. But that deficit or that account is in a negative, and that's essentially us borrowing from a future study. Nevertheless, logically it follows, and we use some monies from development charges to pay very similar related studies. So there's probably some additional funds there. And we'd actually have to do an analysis to get an exact figure and percentage, but assuming you took around 18,000 there, then you have 18 plus 16 takes you to 34, plus 15 takes you to 44, 49. So you're right in the ballpark of possibly maybe having found enough from in-year savings or reapportioning spending. That puts us in the ballpark.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. CAO. Any other comments, either on what the CAO has said or the discussion in general? Not seeing any, then we will ask the clerk to conduct the vote.
So on the question, Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
No.
Mayor Junkin.
No.
The motion carries by majority.
Okay. Matters of the committee, matters of committee of the whole or policy or priorities committee. We have nothing there. So we move down, I would think, to resolution to move in camera.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we have a motion by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the next portion of the meeting be closed to the public in order to consider the following pursuant to the Municipal Act, Section 239(2), personal matters about identifiable individuals, including municipal employees, 2 items. Councillor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
The motion carries. So if you'll just give me a few moments, I do need to stop the recording and the live streaming.